Hello, I'm Jen Grammer, and my topic is about the architectural promenade. And this was an idea that Corbusier presented during the 20s, and I believe that this idea of promenade is still relevant today, and that it has connections in postmodernism and deconstructivism. So Corbusier stated that architecture is experienced as one roams about in it, and walks through it. And so this idea of the architectural promenade was the observer's path through the built space is a central element of Le Corbusier's architectural and city planning designs. And so Corbusier, this is his Carpenter's building, one of the only buildings that he designed in North America. And you can see that the way that one approaches the building through this ramp, he creates this very experiential entrance, and visually these windows and the shadows. He's really thinking about how people are approaching the building and changing the elevation, and you can see that this path goes through the building and out the building, and once you're in the building, the way light is entering, very gracious and sort of intimate, and he's has the observer central in his thought and while he's designing. And so as you're approaching the building and entering through this ramp, it's this sort of promenade, this journey that's the experience of entering the building is really the architecture leading the way, visually changing elevation. And so you can see that Corbusier really has the observer central in his architecture. And so we move on to postmodernism, and Frederick Jameson, an architectural critic of the time, states that the postmodern is, however, the force field in which very different impulses must make their way. And so this is the Bonaventure Hotel by John C. Portman. It was built in 1974. And it's really a representation of the postmodern sort of movement. There's no obvious way to enter the building. And once you're in the building, it's difficult to get around the building. They've had to go back and add wayfinding so that people can get to where they're going. But these series of this sort of promenade, this idea of this gracious journey is turned on its head and becomes this sort of chaotic mess of people moving about and not really experiencing, but sort of frantic. And this sort of reflected the mass consumerism and these ideas that were coming with the advent of technology reaching the mass market, and people sort of getting ideas from lots of different sources and lots of different ways. And so the journey was very different. And then we get to deconstructivism, and Jacques Derrida, a philosopher of this period that sort of follows postmodernism, describes it as a path which does not have to be discovered, but to be created. And this is Zaha Hadid's design. She was important architect of the deconstructivist movement, but it it's sort of this deconstructing of architecture, and in that deconstruction and then reconstruction, that's where you find the meaning. And Jacques Derrida relates it to the way that we talk and the structure of language, and that it can have multiple meanings, and that diverse ways of thinking can exist. So in his interview with Eva Meyer, he talks about this impossibility of mastering the diversity of languages. But he says the issue is not to give up one point of view for the sake of another, which would be the only one and absolute, but to see a diversity of possible points of views. And so in the deconstructivist movement, you can see the architects playing with different points of views and different ways to approach architecture, building materials, and even sort of turning this sort of idea of journey as this as a very abstract journey. And I believe that today, we still want this promenade, this sort of intimate journey, and that, this idea of this utopian society that Bjarke Ingels, he calls it pragmatic utopian, but we still want this sort of promenade and this journey, and Frederick Law Olmsted, states the enjoyment of scenery employs the mind without fatigue, and yet exercises it and tranquilizes it, and yet enlivens it. And so I think that this next movement of sort of this promenade is going to integrate nature and bring natural, sustainable elements back into our cities. We've got population growth and global climate change, and those are sort of the issues of today. And so I think that we're coming together, we're coming back into cities and urbanizing, and I think that possibly the architects of tomorrow will, we still want to incorporate this sort of promenade that Corbusier presented, but maybe it will be a sort of natural promenade. Thank you.